What's up, everybody? Thanks for listening to the Whatcast. Sorry for my hoarse and nasally voice. I got the COVID. Since our schedule's been a little spotty lately, we said fuck it, and we decided to record anyway.
Luckily, I'll pick up the slack here, and I'll do most of the talking for you, Mateo.
Yeah,
you can just respond with grunts and sign language that the listeners can't see.
Stern looks and nods.
Yeah, smoke signals. People will be listening to the podcast, and all of a sudden a puff of smoke will come through. They're like, what the fuck was that? I'm telling you right now what that was. That was Mateo's smoke signal that he's sending you. That's his part of the conversation. So, decipher that however you will, but that's what that was. Don't be afraid.
Yeah, don't make me sound like an asshole, that's all.
Yeah, he's probably whispering sweet nothings. And you're like, well, that's out of context, Mateo. It's not. He's just being really sweet about it, that's all.
No one's ever touched me there. Don't say that. So patrons will get the extra spicy, sensual Mateo commentary from now on.
Yeah, that is a new tier we are opening in Patreon. It's the sexy Mateo tier. You can sign up for that tier, and it's basically 24/7 sexy Mateo.
It's what we're gonna do is play the episode but lower the volume, and I'm just gonna come in with heavy reverb and be sexy.
And there'll likely be some smooth jazz playing in the background.
Ooh, good call.
Yeah. The entire time, because it's sexy time with Mateo. My voice will be the same. It's not sexy time with Mike.
Yeah, when Mike talks, I'll turn it back up so you'll hear his normal response.
Actually, if you could pitch my voice up to make it more obnoxious, that would be ideal. Just
right.
to completely differentiate that this is sexy Mateo, not Mike. Nobody is having sexy time with Mike, except for Sam. Sam gets all the sexy time he wants. What's up, baby?
With all the AI stuff, we can probably just run the show through it and make your voice female, and I'll just be talking to you sexy.
Oh God, that could get awkward real quick. I'm sure the fucking patrons would love it. Nikki would fucking lose her shit. And for everyone who's like, who the fuck are Sam and Nikki? They're two of our patrons, and they're fucking awesome. So if you want to get to know them, join Patreon, and we can all, get together and have good times or awkward times with sexy Mateo.
Yeah, all sexy Mateo times are awkward. Just know that.
Yeah, it's sexy time with Mateo, awkward time with Mike. Then again, you can make the argument most times with me are awkward times with Mike. It's just edited to make me sound not awkward.
Yeah, Mike has this habit you guys don't know about, but when he's thinking, he goes, "Oh!"
Yeah, that's putting it mildly, but thankfully he
take them all
he
out.
edits all that out. Yeah, it's good stuff. So anyway, join Patreon because it's awesome, but we're not here to talk about that anymore.
No, what are we going to talk about?
We got some serious business to attend to here. It's been a while since we've put out an episode. We're a bunch of fucking slackers. We're old men falling apart. We're dying and being reborn every fucking day. It's bullshit.
Yeah, I couldn't believe it. I got so ready to bust ass this month, like towards the end of this month, going into next month. And after all the vacations and leg injuries and physical therapy, I sat down to do some work and fucking got COVID. 4 fucking years into this stupid shit, and I got COVID.
Yeah, it took you long enough.
Yeah.
Fucking procrastinator. Yeah. So I wanted to do something cool, something that was new to me anyway. So I found this series of weird cases that took place in northern Sweden and Finland in 1971, the winter of 1971. And there's some other cases that tie into this, but it seems like there was this weird flap that occurred specifically in February of 1971. And it became known as the Little Man. And most of the reports from it came from northern Sweden's largest newspaper called NSD. They had initially reported the sightings, and then the sightings were compiled in a magazine called UFO Information in March 2nd, 1971. This particular magazine is put out by an organization called UFO Sweden. So all of it was in Swedish. We can link to those articles if there's interest, if there's anyone who speaks Swedish that wants to take a gander. But the story centers, like I said, around this entity known as the Little Man. So the first reported sighting occurred on February 2nd, and it was published in the February 15th edition of NSD. The story itself took place outside a small town, Keminkki, in Finland on February 2nd around 8 p.m. And there were two witnesses, Mrs. Manninen and her friend. And they were on a drive out in the area around Keminkki. And Miss Manninen, who's the one who reported it, she was the passenger. And she notices a strange ball of light that's trailing alongside the car on the right side. And she becomes frightened by this light and tells her friend who's driving not to look at the light. So her friend, maintains eye contact with the road in front of her, and rather than trying to look and see what's going on with this light. But Mrs. Manninen keeps an eye on it, and she's watching it, seeing what it's doing. And after a while, it crosses the road and it starts following on the left side of the car now. And then the object flies directly over the car and so it's flying over the top of the car, not like goes beyond them, but it's following them, flying above the car until they reach this empty field. And when they reach the empty field, the light suddenly vanishes. So they're thinking, well, that's weird. What the fuck was that light? And but they continued to drive. But then Mrs. Manninen notices what she at first takes to be a child on the side of the road, and she calls out to her friend to be careful and make sure you're watching this kid so you don't hit the kid as you're driving. And as they approach, they see this small face peeking over the top of a snowbank on the side of the road. And they slow their car down, and they come to a stop to talk to the kid, see what's going on. But once they stop, they realize this is not a kid. It's a small creature that's about 3 feet tall, and it came out, jumps over the snowbank, and starts skipping across the road. And they said it appeared to be wearing a helmet and a greenish brown suit, and there was something strange about it. It didn't seem like a normal person. For one, it's nighttime in the middle of nowhere, and it's fucking 3 feet tall. So, I mean, you could make the argument maybe it's a kid that got lost, but they stopped the car to look at it, and as soon as they looked at it, they knew it wasn't a kid. A common thing with this particular entity is that the people that see it are never able to describe its face. Usually they say they can't see the face, or the face just looks gray.
Huh.
Yeah, so that's kind of a weird thing, because it's the commonalities in all the sightings are that it's wearing either a helmet or a hat, but its face isn't obscured. It's wearing something on its head, but its face is there. They just can't see its face.
Interesting.
Yeah. But the after the thing skipped across the road, they both became frightened and sped off. And then they called it in, reported it, and The officers they reported it to said both women seemed to be clear-headed and sober. And then when they were interviewed by UFO Sweden, they also drew the same conclusion. It doesn't seem like these women were making things up or in hysterics or anything. But nothing, there was nothing further on that particular report. But the same night, and the same night, there was another situation that happened that it's kind of weird. This one isn't as weird, but it was again published by NSD. But this happened on the same night, February 2nd. There were two women in Kelsjärv who were staying, this is in Sweden now, who were staying up late listening to records. And during the early pre-dawn hours, they were still awake, still listening to music, and they happened to look out their window and they noticed a strange-looking humanoid figure on the side of the road outside the house. And they said this figure was about 3 feet tall, but seemed to be crooked. And that's how they could describe it. They just said he looked crooked. And the figure was wearing black clothing and what appeared to be a cap on top of his head, but they weren't able to make out his face. And they watched him for a while, and he just kind of seemed to disappear or fade from sight. And so they thought it was weird, they weren't frightened by it or anything, and it was only reported because of the previous report that was reported at NSD. And they're like, well, we saw something that same night. But also, after reading that first article, there was another report that came in. A woman named Martha Millender called NSD after reading the initial report, and she reported an incident that occurred the previous summer in August. And in her encounter, it was her husband, and one of their friends, and they were traveling between Narken and Yakfall. And the driver was a tractor driver named Osar Sandberg, he's 51 years old. And then her husband is Olaf Millender, who by his profession is an iron worker. He's 44. And then she was with them. She was 43 at the time. So 2 miles south from Narken, the three of them spot this small creature. And in her statement, Mrs. Millender said, "As we approached the creature, my husband said, 'What a strange person.' At that moment, there was a loud bang and blinding white light. The radio in the car began to crackle. As the light flashed, we saw a little man that seemed to shield his face with his hands as if protecting himself from the light. Osar had to slam on his brakes to avoid going off the road. After the incident, he had to see an ophthalmologist and had chronic problems with his eye because he couldn't see in his right eye." When describing the creature, Osar and Miss Millender both said he was standing around 3 feet tall. He was wearing a short coat. They didn't mention anything particular about his headwear, but they said they could not see his face. Even though they mentioned he put his arm up like to shield his face, they couldn't see his face. They said that the light that they saw appeared to be different from a lightning strike, but they did admit it was raining that night. But the light seemed to be an arc of light rather than like a lightning strike. And in fact, Osar had claimed that he had witnessed lightning strikes firsthand and said that what they saw didn't even remotely resemble what a lightning bolt looked like up close.
Okay.
He said that the origin for this light appeared to be right in front of the car rather than like coming from the sky. He said it looked like it just originated in front of the car. And after the initial flash, the light seemed to fade away rather than just blink out. So the interviewers from UFO Sweden sat down and talked to Osar, and they in their questioning, they had asked him if he knew anyone else who had seen the creature. And he claimed that there were a lot of people that witnessed strange things in this area, but very rarely are the people that saw it willing to talk about it. And he said the only reason he was talking about it was because Mrs. Millender had seen the report in the newspaper. And he said even among the three of them, they hadn't discussed it even once since the event happened. And if Mrs. Millender hadn't called it in, then none of them would have ever even talked about it again. But Osar claimed that none of them had discussed it. They weren't planning on discussing it. But he did mention that he had to have subsequent doctor visits after the sighting. A few days after the incident, he had trouble seeing out of his right eye, so he went to the doctor, and the doctor ended up finding a crack in the retina of his eye. The doctor, he explained the situation to the doctor, what they had witnessed and everything, and the doctor wasn't sure if the damage to his eye could be attributed to the sighting, but he did admit that the damage was consistent with people who had looked at the sun for a prolonged period of time or looked directly into a lightning strike.
Oh.
That damage to his eye never went away.
Now, I mean, like, I don't know. I guess if a lightning strike hits the ground that close to somebody, it's usually, I mean, wouldn't that cause, like, damage? To the area?
Right.
That's not something that people would usually get to observe that close. So permanent damage makes sense.
Yeah. And once that light faded, the little man was gone.
Oh. I find that interesting because he even seemed to react to this bright light.
Yeah. Yeah, like he was shielding his face. So this one happened, like I said, in August. The other two were in February, but this one just got brought up because of the two in February. But the sightings continued on throughout February. And on February 26th, there was another encounter with the little man that was again reported by NSD. This was in the village of Strokon, and the event itself occurred February 16th, but it was reported in the February 26th edition of NSD. So to be fair, this event was allegedly occurred one day after the initial article was published. So make of that what you will. So at this point, the only story that had been reported when this occurred was the initial story with the light following the car and then the little man running across the road. So the other stories were not reported yet. So this occurred February 16th. A man named Mr. Westerberg, who was 26 years old, was waiting for a bus around 6 p.m. At this time of the year, it's dark at 6 p.m. So he was watching for the bus, expecting to see the headlights coming down the road. And when he looked down the road, he noticed this small humanoid figure. It was standing around 3 feet tall, pretty typical at this point. It was wearing black clothing, and he said it was about 40 to 50 feet away from him. When he was looking, he couldn't see a face. He just saw gray where the face would be. And he said that the figure seemed to be holding some sort of box around his stomach area. So because this, whatever it is, it wasn't anything that looked normal. And Mr. Westerberg was curious about it. So he thought about approaching the figure. But as soon as he took a step toward it, he heard this low growling sound, which frightened him. And it caused him to run a few yards back in the opposite direction. He didn't keep running, though. He just ran a few yards just to put a little distance between them, and he stopped and he turned around, and he said that the little man was still standing in the same spot. But suddenly, there was a blinding white light, and he said it was so bright that he had to close his eyes, and the light seemed to remain for a few seconds, and then it faded away. And once it faded away, he opened his eyes and the little man was gone.
Right. That's very interesting. This is the exact same thing. There's no question that this...
Right. With him, though, he didn't get any damage to his eyes. And at the time, he felt fine. The bus came about 5 minutes after his encounter, and he went on his way. And once he got home that evening, though, he had trouble falling asleep. And he said he had this excruciating pain in every joint in his body. And he went to lay down, and he couldn't fall asleep because of the pain. And then he said just before he fell asleep, his body was paralyzed. And he couldn't move or feel any sensation other than the pain in his joints. But eventually he was able to fall asleep, but he doesn't remember falling asleep. He was paralyzed, but he ended up falling asleep. And when he woke up the next morning, all discomfort in his joints was gone, and he was able to move normally and had no lasting effects at all.
What do you think that was? Like an attempted or maybe possibly successful abduction?
I don't know. It's weird because the light is something that comes up later as well. So I don't know if it's like an abduction attempt or if it's maybe like this thing's like teleportation device, and it just creates this bright light.
Right, it's just cutting out.
Yeah.
What do you think about this description? Actually getting a good look at its face and basically calling it faceless.
Yeah, he says just gray. Because you'd have to think, like, if it was a gray alien, and you're looking at it from a distance, because their eyes are so big, you're not gonna say it just looked gray. Those eyes are the thing that everybody who's seen a gray describes.
Right, you would most likely describe it as having only big giant eyes.
Right. Rather than having just a gray face. So it's weird. Like, I wonder if it's like some sort of covering, or maybe it's actually faceless, or maybe its facial features are just so small that we can't, it can't be seen unless you're like really close to it. I don't know. It's weird.
Yeah.
But the sightings continued. In fact, there were 2 sightings that occurred on February 25th. First one, again near Yakfall, and a man named Mr. Jacobson was walking down the road at night when he noticed this cone, what he described as a cone of light. And he guessed that the cone itself was about 6 feet in diameter. And as he approached, the light flared up, and as soon as it flared up, he was held in place, completely frozen. He said that he was completely frozen, couldn't move a muscle for 2 minutes, and it felt like he was being held in a vice the entire time. The light itself, he said, only lasted about a minute, and then it faded out. But even after it faded, he was frozen in place for another minute, and it took him a full 10 minutes to regain full mobility. And once he did, he turned around and went back home.
Wow.
He didn't see the little man, but he attributed this to the little man. He said he didn't even believe in the stories about the little man, but after this happened to him, he believes that it's probably true.
What else could it be, bro?
Yeah. I mean, maybe he just saw the light coming from its device. And, like when you're seeing a light facing you as you're approaching it, you're not able to see what's behind that light. You just see the light.
Mm-hmm.
On the same night, Mrs. Anne-Marie Lundbacks claimed that she also saw the little man. She had been driving in her car alone, and she passed a restaurant called the Three Shells Restaurant. And as she passed it, she saw a little man crossing the road in front of her. Again, he was 3 feet tall, and he was wearing what appeared to be a dark coat. And he had a strange lamp that was strapped to his stomach. And she said on his head it was either a hood or a helmet. But as she approached him, as she went to slam on her brakes, and there was a sudden flash of bright light, and she was temporarily blinded.
Wow.
Once the light faded, the little man was gone.
That's nuts. Again, the exact same thing. No question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the beings with these little men with these boxes attached to their chest or stomach were reported previous to this, in fact. Going back to the earlier case from August, Osar was asked about that, and he said that what they saw, he didn't have a box on his chest, so he doesn't know where the light originated from. But they didn't see, when they saw the little man there, they didn't see a box or a lamp.
It's strange to call it a lamp.
Yeah, maybe just because it's like emitting light. So that's what or a lantern or something. But these sightings seem to, for some reason in February, they really picked up. But the sightings persisted here and there. It just wasn't where like every week you're hearing a new story. But I'm going to just, rather than, get into all the small stories here and there, I want to jump ahead a few years, but then jump back a few years, because they're two related stories. But I want to share one first and tie it into the earlier one. And if you guys like this and it's, you want to hear more about this, there's a lot of weird, kind of similar sort of stories in northern Sweden. So if we have any listeners out there that are from that region that want to share any stories, please send us an email and let us know. I would like to do a part 2 on this, maybe. So if we can get more information or more stories, that would be awesome.
Yeah, it would.
All right. So moving ahead, we're going to go to October 18th, 1977. Kurt Nelson was a shortwave radio enthusiast, and he would regularly drive around in his car with his shortwave radio to see if he could connect with other people. Kurt had a shortwave radio that was for the 27 megahertz band. So for anybody who's like young and doesn't know what a shortwave radio is, I don't even know how to fucking describe. Because I was gonna say think like an internet chat room, but like those things aren't even a thing anymore. It basically what you would do. It was like walkie talkies sort of, but they would go much further. And sometimes you'd catch a radio wave that would be bouncing off the ionosphere, and you'd be talking to someone hundreds of miles away. And it's just the way that the radio signals bounce around. So sometimes you'd only be able to pick up people locally. Sometimes you'd get someone in another country. And it was a hobby that Kurt had. So it wasn't weird for him to just be going out and trying to see who he can connect with. So on this particular night, he went out for a drive and was unable to make any connections on that particular band. So he decided he was going to drive up to the mountains to see who he'd be able to connect with at a higher elevation. And he drove up this mountain where there was a link station for TV and radio. And he's driving up the mountain, and he ends up making contact with an acquaintance of his that's around 70 miles south of where he is. But it's someone, based on the article, I wasn't sure if it was someone he actually knew or if it was someone that he had just connected with previously over the radio.
Okay.
But he made contact with him once he got up there, and they were just kind of shooting the shit. But once he got within a quarter mile of the link station, the person that he was speaking with started experiencing interference. But it was a weird interference, because usually if there's interference on a radio signal, it's picked up on both sides. But in this instance, it was only affecting the guy he was speaking with. He was unable to hear Kurt, but Kurt could hear him just fine. So obviously you can't have a conversation when someone can't hear you. So once Kurt pulled up to the broadcast tower, he stopped communication because of the interference. And around 8 p.m., he got out of his car and just kind of looked around, just kind of taking in the view from this elevation. And as he was looking around the mountain, he notices this pale blue light that was, he estimated, around 300 feet away off to his left. And when he looked, it was this object that appeared to be a domed machine that was kind of like parked in this little hollow. And he estimated that the machine itself was about 12 to 15 feet wide. And it seemed to, when I say parked, it wasn't like on the ground. It was hovering over this spot. And the machine itself seemed to emit this pale blue glow that was a very dim glow, but it was definitely a noticeable glow. So he's looking at this. He's trying to figure out what the fuck this thing is. And all of a sudden, there's these 3 figures that appear outside the machine. Again, these figures, 3 feet tall. But he claims that they were wearing space clothes, whatever that means. But he said that they were gray. So whether that means the clothes or the skin that he was able to see, he said that they were wearing space clothes and that they were gray. So Kurt wants to get a better look, jumps into his car, turns on his headlights to better illuminate the area so he could see, because what he's seeing is only through the light of this dim glow from this machine. So he turns his headlights on, and as soon as the lights go on, the craft and the creatures disappear, just completely gone. He turns his light on, and he's just looking at the area where they were with nothing there at all. So he turns his lights off, and as soon as he turns the lights off, he sees that pale glow again, and he sees the creatures again, still in the same spot. But for some reason this time, when he spots them, he gets that fear, and instantly he feels he's just overwhelmed by the fear, and he needs to leave the area as fast as he can. So he gets in his car and takes off down the road away from this, away from the broadcast station. And he doesn't get very far. He gets about a quarter mile down the road, which coincidentally is around the same distance where the interference started taking place when he was on the radio call with somebody else. But he gets about a quarter mile down the road, and there are 3 figures standing in the road ahead of him. And before he realizes what he's doing, his car starts slowing down. And he can't recall if he was the one that applied the brake or if the car slowed down on its own. But now that he was close to these figures and the headlights were on, he was able to get a better look at them. And they were about 3 feet tall. But he said that the suits they wore appeared to look like gray, smooth plastic. And the boots of the suit and the helmet of the suit all seemed to be molded into one piece. And he said the front of the helmets had slits or visors where eyes would be. And they all stood together. There were, the one in the middle had what was just what Kurt described as being a shovel. He said he was holding on, like, think of, I don't know exactly what this type of shovel is used for, but you know the shovels that it's got the shovel handle, but then at the very top it's got like a crossbar.
Right. Yeah.
So that's the type of shovel he had, and it was holding it, so its arms were parallel holding that crossbar. But he said the creature rotated the shovel so that its arms are now crossed over each other. So it didn't let go of the handle as it rotated it. It just crossed its arms.
Weird.
And once it did that, the convex part of the shovel was facing him. And once it did that, the other creatures on both sides intently stared down at the shovel. And then his car dies and the headlights go out. And he's left in complete darkness now. So he doesn't know. Obviously, these things don't like the light because he went in the car the first time, they disappeared, turned the car off, they reappeared, and then he got afraid. And then he drove down the road with his headlights on. They see him, kill his car, kill the headlights. So I'm not sure. I don't think this is something he can do with cars nowadays because of the way they are. But older cars, you could turn the headlights on and off without the car running. Even with the car off, like you could flip the switch so that when you turn the car on, your lights aren't going to turn on. So his car's dead. He manually turns off the headlights on the car and then tries to start it back up. To his relief, the car starts up, no problem. And once it starts up, he throws it in reverse and goes back a few hundred yards and stops. And he waited there for 5 minutes before he would dare to turn his headlights on. When he did, the road was empty and he went home. Once he gets home, he's obviously all shaken up. That's a really fucking freaky incident to happen. He tells his wife about it, and his wife actually becomes interested, and she's like, well, let's go back up there and see if we can find anything. So she convinces him to go back up, and they're not able to, they don't see any evidence. And kind of as an aside to the story, and on their way back, he ended up getting pulled over by a cop because he accidentally left his high beams on when they passed him. So the cop pulled him over, and he told the cop what happened. And in the interview, the cop, the UFO Sweden team interviewed the cop, and he said, yeah, he told me about it, and he seemed to be of sound mind. He wasn't drunk or anything, but take that for what it's worth. I just wanted to mention that. But Kurt gets back home, and he calls his friend Shell to tell him about his strange encounter. For one, because Shell was the manager of the link station that he had just gone up to, and he wanted to tell him about the interference with the radio because as the manager of the link station, any radio interference would have been his responsibility to look into. But he also told him, because Shell had told him about a strange encounter that he had previously, which occurred at this particular station. So this is where I'm going to jump back to 1969. This story isn't exactly a little man story, but because it's tied to a little man story, and there's all these other little man stories, I wanted to share it because this story in particular is one of the weirder alien encounters I've ever heard.
Nice.
So this happened back on March 12th, 1969. Shell was at his post. It was night. He was working overnight this night. And the alarm started to go off, which indicated there was interference in the broadcast lines. So he ran all the tests, did all the diagnostics, and was unable to find anything wrong that would have been causing this interference. But since this is the link station, it's his job to figure out what's the interference and fix it. So he reports the interference and continues to investigate what's going on. As the night wears on, he gets this sudden compulsion to go outside. He doesn't know why. He's working his shift, and all of a sudden, it's like a voice in his head said, go outside and take a look. So he goes out and he opens the door of the station and he sees this huge craft. He said it was over 300 feet in diameter, and it just was kind of sitting in this small hollow a few a few hundred feet away from the transmitter building. At the bottom of the craft, he sees this gray glowing tunnel, and the craft itself was surrounded by this gray glowing fog. So he's standing there in the doorway, and he's just looking at it like, I mean, what else do? You see this crazy thing a few hundred feet in front of you. And he looks down into the tunnel, and he sees what he describes as 10 individuals. And he refers to them as creatures, but let me describe what he saw. He said that they looked like boxes that appeared to be sprayed with something, and they resembled clouds without fixed contours, and they floated off the ground. As he watched them, he said he had a strong desire to go back inside and call the police, but at that point realized he was unable to move at all. And he had this feeling that told him to stand and hold the door open and welcome them in. So he stood in the doorway, unable to move, unable to get out of their way, holding the door open as 7 or 8 of these things floated into the station. And they were about a foot or so high, little under a foot, I think he said. But they just kind of floated in. Like he said, it looked like they were walking, but they weren't touching the ground. They weren't making any noise. They didn't have any appendages, no arms, no legs, no tentacles, and they no sound, no smell, nothing. He said as they walked past him, he tried to reach out and touch them, but a force repelled him, and he felt something in his mind telling him to remain calm and that they were not dangerous. And the creatures remained in the station for 5 to 10 minutes. Meanwhile, he's still in the doorway facing out looking at this craft, so he doesn't know what the fuck they're doing. But they were in the station for 5 to 10 minutes, at least as far as he could tell. And then they left again, went right past him, back to the ship, into the tunnel, and then the tunnel closed, and the craft took off and flew off to the north. And Shell actually watched it go until it disappeared over the horizon. And it wasn't until he lost sight of it that he was able to move again. So
that is
not
bizarre.
Exactly a little man encounter, but yeah, it's fucking weird, man. Like weird cloud boxes. What the fuck is that?
Yeah, I want to see like an artist depiction of that situation.
Yeah. I was reminded of when we did the episode talking about the rectangle people.
Yeah.
Those were more Moonanites. These seem like fucking ghosts or something. I don't know. It's weird. It's a weird one.
A Mario Brothers villain.
Yeah. Like, and this is in the late 60s. So at this point, UFOs and aliens are, it's in the public eye now. So for him to have this encounter and see these weird geometry ghosts, I don't know. It's a weird one, man. And the fact that they went into the station and then left without interacting with him at all. Like, what were they doing in there?
Right. It seems like they had a target, a purpose for being there. And,
yeah.
Intent.
And then the fact that his buddy had an encounter with a group of little men 8 years later in the same location.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear an event like this. Like we talked about this, I think the last episode with the dog creature that was seen over a great period of time. And we had to point out that from the first sightings description to one of the more modern ones, the description was similar, but there was a couple of things that varied wildly. Like at the first reports of that thing it was a black fur color, and then the one that was found had red, yellow, and orange hair. But in all these little cases with this little man, this has to be like the most consistent set of sightings I've ever heard in my life.
Yeah, it really seems like the only difference was in the color of his coat. Everything else matches up.
Right. And to me, if these are happening at night, it's not like somebody's calling one black and the other one's calling it construction worker orange. To me,
Right,
it
yeah.
seems like
You got a greenish brown that could easily be a black.
right. It's like a old school garbage bag. Is it dark green? Is it black? Who knows?
Yeah,
And at
yeah.
nighttime, you're not gonna know.
Yeah, and like I said, there's other stories out there about this too. So like, the thing that I love the most, I think, is that there's not other sightings like this anywhere else. Like, this seems to be just in this area. Like, I know you've got your little alien sightings, your typical gray sightings, the ones that look like little elves or something, but this seems to be something different. And the fact that they have these weird light emitting devices that allow them to teleport away, that's something different.
It really is. I wonder I mean, again, this could just be like, I don't know. It's kind of like we have to reconsider cases that we come across like this with all the new information being reported. And again, we have to point out it's all being reported by the government, so who knows. But what do cases like this mean? I think that when we hear about stuff like this now with what's come to light, maybe this is something more of a dimensional creature than aliens landing here and doing this shit. You're not getting it past airspace in certain areas or not be seen by tons of fucking people. These things are teleporting, not flying in.
Yeah. And I wonder if maybe what he was seeing weren't actual beings. What if he was just seeing the lights on the chest? But because he was paralyzed, he wasn't able to follow. So he was just seeing the lights.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know, man. It's a weird, like, I don't know. Because there's another case that's fucking weird as shit. That's kind of, it's a little bit different from this, but it's still kind of similar. Maybe we'll cover it on a Quick and the Weird, or we'll do a part 2 of this. Like I said, if anyone lives in the area, or the region, and is familiar with these stories, or maybe you've had an encounter with the little man yourself, please let us know. But I don't know, man. Like, I want to catch one of those fuckers and get their little light device. The things I would do, Mateo.
You just better hope they're not like the Venezuelan ones and try to beat your ass.
Well, they don't appear to be fuzzy. It's the fuzzy ones, the fuzzy hollow ones. Those are the ones you got to look out for. Was that a episode we did, or was that a Patreon episode?
That was a Patreon episode.
Oh yeah, so people don't even know what the fuck we're talking about. Guys, go join Patreon and you can find out about the hairy hollow
Venezuelan ass kicking
aliens.
They just beat the shit out of everybody they came up on.
Like, oh shit, another guy beat his ass. And like, oh fuck, what are these little hairy things?
Even kids got it.
Pushing old ladies over, kicking dogs. They don't give a fuck. They're gonna fuck the world up.
They were pissed. But I would love to see some type of witness drawings, artist depictions of these little things, and see what type of suit they're giving these things. Are they giving
There
them?
are a few. I'll send you some stuff.
All right.
There are some pictures that was drawn by witnesses. I think there were 2 or 3 different pictures. But
perfect.
They all draw like fucking no face. It's weird.
Yeah, that is bizarre.
Yeah.
Since we got the description of the other one having a visor going over the eyes with the slits, yeah. I wonder if it's part of a mask, if it's just a
yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
And maybe like the hood or the hat or whatever they're wearing over just covers the visor. So you just see blank gray.
Yeah.
It's a possibility, I suppose.
And it growled, though, too. A 3 feet thing growl enough to give a man pause. That's interesting.
Not only pause, but make him fucking run away.
Yeah. Retreat.
Like, oh, shit, that little guy's growling at me.
I wonder if it sounded like a growling person or an animal growl.
He said it sounded like a low growl. So, I don't know. Maybe it was just a dwarf that was practicing his death metal. Who's to say?
Right. With a teleporter.
Yeah. Well, I mean, don't most death metal dwarfs have teleporters? I thought that was like common for that sort of thing.
I hope so.
Makes me want to be a fucking death metal dwarf. Singing about fucking making axes in the mines and killing dragons and stealing gold.
Blinding people with flashes of light.
Yeah. It's just what dwarves do. Fucking dwarves.
It's the way, it's the future wave of metal.
Yeah.
Alien dwarf metal.
Alien dwarf metal. Yeah. And once it takes off, I think that we should claim responsibility for it, since our first song was about the Sheep Slayers.
Yeah, it's true. It's
true. You don't get more death metal dwarves than the Sheep Slayers.
No, that was actually a very death metal song.
Yeah.
And it's on our YouTube. Go check it out.
Yeah, it is. It's there with all the things.
For you.
Thank you for listening to the Whatcast. You can find us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, iTunes, and YouTube. Enjoy the podcast. Get yourself a Whatcast t-shirt or a sticker pack. Who was that dude on that one episode? Try the links in Homie's page. All this and more can be found at www.thewhatcasters.com. Thanks again for listening and have a great week.